Chairperson, Pablo and friends, I bring you greetings of peace and solidarity from Malaysia. In the next 15 minutes, I would like to make one point and one point alone, though. That what we are looking at is the writing of a new constitution in front of us. Whether it's in ASEAN, whether at the global level, through the ISDS or the bilateral investment treaties, what we are doing is our countries are helping to write a new constitution, and this new constitution is dictated by global or big business or global corporations. This is what I'm going to argue, whether it's ASEAN or at the global level, a new constitution is being written for us and highly influenced by big corporations. In so doing, I'm going to focus on 4 sets of issues. One, looking at FTAs, free trade agreements, looking at ISDS, which I think was done very well by Pablo and also by the earlier documentary that we saw, and also looking at ASEAN, since my focus is also on ASEAN, and finally looking at the implications of BITs or and ISDS. Now, I'm going to focus on the first part on looking at the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And this Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement right now is almost in the final stages of concluding. Chances are that by end of this year, there will be some agreement. Whether it's a total agreement or initial agreement that they're going to come up with, it's not clear. But there will be some consensus on the agreement. This agreement is considered or is being spoken about as a 21st century agreement, though. A 21st century agreement. Now, you have similar arguments, similar chapters, also in the European Union, Thailand agreement or Malaysia agreement. The chapters are almost the same, except that they're all woven in a bit differently. But the point I want to raise here is this. In the case of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which involves 12 countries, the big brother is the United States. They are the one who are really pushing for this. The smaller brother, who just came on board in the 19th round or the 18th round in Kota Kinabalu, is Japan. You also have Canada, you have New Zealand, you have Australia, you have Chile, you have Peru, you have Malaysia, you have Singapore, and you also have Brunei. So 12 countries are involved in these negotiations. And it's now, as I said, almost close to conclusion. Now, in this agreement, there are 29 chapters. There are 29 chapters in this agreement. But interestingly, in this free trade agreement, only 5 involves actual trade. Only 5 involves actual trade. That means when you buy and you sell, you buy from one country and you sell to another country. Exchange of goods and services. Okay? So you have 5 chapters focusing on goods, services, agriculture, rules of origin. This is real trade. This is where trade takes place. But you have 24 chapters. You have 24 chapters essentially which has got nothing to do with trade. What has government procurement got to do with trade? What has labor got to do with trade? What has environment, what has intellectual property rights have got to do with trade, though? But in this 21st century agreement, now all of this comes to as part of a trade agreement. In fact, if you look at it, you're looking at something called a new government is being formed without your knowledge, though. And the way a government should operate is now being determined by this free trade agreement. I give you a good example. For example, now, government procurement. For Malaysia, government procurement is very crucial. It's very crucial because, one, it's part of its development policy. Number 2, it is important to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. And number 3, it's also we have a very sensitive race environment. very sensitive race relations in the country, and government procurement helps to bridge that race relations problems that we have. Now, I'm not saying there's no corruption. Yes, there is corruption, but the point is that these are tools of government. These are policy space of government that government uses in order to bring about changes in their own economy or their own country. But now, the government cannot provide for that anymore. The government cannot do that anymore in favor of a local company or of a local vulnerable group. Because now, as Pablo pointed out, we have something called national treatment, which means the foreign company will come to Malaysia and that foreign company must be given equal status as a local investor. Same. If you give subsidy for the local guy, you have to give subsidy for them. And if they get less, they can sue you. So now what happens is this. All of this now comes under the free trade agreement. In fact, the whole policy space of government will be lost. I'll speak about it a bit later. But look, 5 chapters on trade and 24 chapters on what you call trade facilitation. Now, you look at this and you get the impression that something is wrong with this trade agreement, though. But our government's thing is the best thing that happened to them. Our government's thing is the best thing that happened to them because this is going to open up trade. But let's discuss that further. Now, what you see is this. Sorry, let me go back. Where do I go back now? What do you see from here? From here, this part here, 24 chapters, is something called regulatory convergence. That means all the 12 countries that are signing on to this agreement will have similar laws, similar standards, and similar regulations. Similar. That means Malaysia must now adopt, Brunei, Vietnam, Singapore must adopt the same standards or same regulations as that is practiced by the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and so on and so forth. That is what regulatory coherence means, or convergence or coherence. That's what's going to happen. That's number one. Number two, really, this ISDS BIT mechanism is about disciplining government, though. It's about disciplining. This is the most important, if you ask me, though. It is about telling the government how to behave itself. If you don't behave in the way that we want you to behave, always remember, we can refer you to a court outside of your country where you have no control. Where you have no control. I just want to go back to something else. I just want to show you that in the so-called 21st Century Agreement, you have something called a chapter on transparency. You have a chapter on transparency, and that chapter tells the government what they should do, how they need to be transparent, especially when it comes to commercial contracts involving investors. So that means the local government loses its ability and now is forced to listen to a corporation outside or this agreement that is going to be put forward in how that government should actually follow transparency rules and regulations. Now, these transparency rules and regulations will now come part of your local domestic law, which will happen. I'm not sure if the EU ASEAN or EU Malaysia or EU Thailand has a transparency chapter, though. But I first saw the chapter actually in the Korea-US agreement, where there's actually a chapter on transparency. A chapter on transparency. So this is one of the new developments, if you want, of the so-called 21st century agreements. So one, you have regulatory convergence, which all standards, regulations are the same throughout the 12 countries, so easy to do business. But what is, for me, in my most important, my mind is, this is about disciplining governments. This is about disciplining governments. Now, I think the example of Cochabamba was a great one. But you have many, many other equally important issues which involves the social life of people, which involves public health, which are now at stake. The famous one being the Uruguayan tobacco issue that is now being referred to at ICSID. Now, what did the Uruguayan government do? What did it do? It simply said, we want to change our tobacco laws in the interest of public health, means in the interest of its people. So we want to change the images outside the box. That's all. We want to tell people smoking is bad. That's what they wanted to do. But Philip Morris said, no, that's not a good idea because it means less profits for us. But when the government persisted in doing it, they said, we will teach you a lesson. We will take you to exit. Right? Now that is the point about discipline. This is about disciplining the government. This is about disciplining the government. Now, the same situation is in Australia. We think this only affects developing countries, but Australia is not really a developing country, it's a developed country of sorts. But that government too has a similar problem because in the issue of plain packaging, the local courts ruled in favor of the government. That the government has the right and Philip Morris cannot force the government to change its policies. But Philip Morris now says, I don't have to listen to your courts, but I'm going to exit. So again, the point being that they have the power to discipline. That means they have the cane that the governments always have to remember that when you make policies, you better watch it because we will bring the cane and we will give you a beating. And the beating will be running into millions and millions, if not billions of dollars. Okay, this is the second point. Now, a new constitution, the point I made was, a new constitution is being written in front of us. Once the decision is made on plain packaging at exit, once the decision on Uruguay is made at exit, then it is binding of sorts to all other countries of the world. So in so doing, Malaysia, for example, which has already a policy of that's saying no, cigarettes are bad for health, must remove it. So a new constitution is being written in front of us, though. A new constitution is being written without our knowledge, and for what is worse, we didn't even vote for this government that is going to be that is making the decision in Washington D.C. in exit. We vote for our governments. We vote for government in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Malaysia. They might be lousy governments, though. But the point is, somebody, one or two, three people in exit are going to make the decisions for all of us all over the world. Okay? So what is happening is, this is a lock-in mechanism. This new constitution is a lock-in mechanism that binds you legally, and you cannot get out of it, though. Now, why do corporations go to ISDS? Use the ISDS strategy for various reasons. I think the issues have already been raised in Pablo's presentation, as well as the earlier documentary that we saw. But look at changes to domestic regulatory framework. It is the right. Changes to domestic regulatory framework. It is the right of any government on behalf of its people to make policy changes. It is a right. That's what you vote governments for. But now that government cannot do it because its hands are tied to the back. It's tied. So the governments are working like this now. Not with power. People think it works with this power. So actually their hands are all handcuffed. There's a handcuff. That's what's happening. Okay. So, in the case of nuclear energy, I think we have a person from Germany who's going to talk about that. Tobacco, we've already mentioned a bit, but there are lots and lots of cases like that. And the most recent case, this is interesting, of Egypt. Egypt came out with a new policy on minimum wages. You have a minimum wage in Malaysia, in Thailand, right? Yes, we have it in Malaysia. Of course, we can be better than what they're offering us, but still we have a minimum wage. Now, Aviola, the French infrastructure and utility company, is now taking the government of Egypt to ISDS, saying that if you implement, minimum wages, it is going to affect our profitability. So who is the real government here? The government of Egypt or Aviola in this particular case, though? Big corporations. They have become the government. So these are some of the reasons why they go to ISDS. and this has already been mentioned. This is interesting. The International Chamber of Commerce itself is arbitrator. Businessmen get together and arbitrate, though. This is really interesting. There's something interesting here. Now, this is 2012 alone. You had 58 new cases, and this is the first time ever that so many cases in 1 year. In 2012, for the first time, it was the highest for any 1 year, 58 new cases. Now, what is interesting about the 58 new cases is 37 are filed by developed nations and 27 are filed against developing countries. So more and more, the developing country is now vulnerable to this ISDS approach. And the big corporations are using it against the governments of developing countries. This is quite important. This is the biggest one I think they have given out so far, which is 2.3 billion US dollars to against Ecuador. This is an oil company. Occidental is an oil company. And can you imagine the interest? I didn't realize there was an interest payment as well. So the longer you take to pay, you have to pay interest as well. So there's no way out here, though. Absolutely no way out. There's a principal amount, and there's an interest attached to that principal amount. You know, in Malay, there's a saying, tiada esok bagimu, which means there's no future for you, though. This is the case of no future for you. Now, ASEAN. Now, all this while we have thought that ASEAN is this loose arrangement where decisions are not binding and that our governments have something called a consensus approach towards decision making. Now, it might be true in the political sense and for political reality in Southeast Asia, but for economic and business reasons, we have become a rules-based system. We have become a rules-based system. Already in the AFTA, we have a dispute settlement body. But now we also have the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement, which came into force in March 2012. Now, they allow for 180 days of some kind of approach to resolve your domestic problems or within the region itself. But if you cannot solve it within 180 days, then you go to ICSID. You follow the ISDS system. So really, we are also, while Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement promotes ISDS in the investment chapter, the EU, Thailand, EU, Malaysia also promotes ISDS approach to the investment chapter. ASEAN governments too use the ISDS approach in order to resolve disputes within themselves and also from the outside world, corporations from outside the world. So ASEAN too, so we are part of the same process as well. But the only caveat here is you are given 180 days to resolve it within yourself. The rest, otherwise, you go to ICSID or something called the UN. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. This one, you go to this. For ASEAN, you go to ICSID and you go to UNCITRAL, Go here. This is where you go to. These are the two places you go to. Not so much the other two. F5. Oh, sorry. Okay, last point. Jokchai has given me another two more minutes, right? Okay. Now, what is this ISDS, BIT, ACI, the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement? What does all this amount to? One, it gives big business, big corporations, legal and enforceable rights. We talk about human rights, right? Now, big business too have rights. They too are saying we have rights and our rights are enforceable. This is a key point though. This is a key point. Number two, it disciplines government. You know, this disciplining of government has been going on for a while. Where our economic policies are very much influenced by our fund managers. What fund managers are saying? If the fund managers say, hey, listen, we think that your deficit is getting too high, we think that you are not balancing your current account, you're not doing this or that, your interest rates must be lower, must be higher, our governments will always follow them. But now we have gone completely to the other side, extreme in support of big business, where big business now holds the government accountable, and that can be, it disciplines the government the way the government behaves itself. Also, the decisions that you make in Parliament, the decisions that some of us make in Parliament is actually can be taken and thrown in the dustbin. Yeah. When we spend so much of time for democracy, right? We go campaigning, you vote, and so on and so forth. True or not? Yes? You don't vote. In Thailand, you don't vote, right? You vote in Thailand, right? Yes? Yeah? You vote. But now, that voting, that democratic practice is a waste of time, though. Why is it a waste of time? Because that decision that you make can be changed when it goes to ICSID, when it goes to other ICC, and so on and so forth. So one, you have a loss in sovereignty. That means the domestic government, the local government is unable to make the decision on behalf of its people because that decision can now be challenged by a court of law, a court of arbitration elsewhere outside the country. Now the government loses policy space. In the case of Malaysia, government procurement, state-owned enterprises will now not be given to local people so as to address poverty, so as to address problems of vulnerability of different groups, and also of race relations. We will have a problem with that. Our governments will lose that. And also your development policies are also at stake. So my friends, I want to submit to you again that what we have is this. Through the bilateral investment treaties, we are doing two things. One, we are pushing for regulatory changes, of course FTA, but more importantly with the BITs, a new constitution which is profit-driven, which is entirely controlled by big business, is taking place. And therefore, we, the people of the world, have to stand up and fight against this corporate colonization. Yes? Thank you.
ขอบคุณมากครับคุณ